find out. Here we are. Hi, everybody. I'm gonna talk into this thing and see what makes any difference. Leslie here, Leslie Plazic and Zazoo Plazz on Thanksgiving week for the Zazoo Plazz report. I am thankful that you are here, and it's a nice night out. I might have to go run out and get some stuff tonight at the store. It's only 6:30. I don't know. No, almost. Oh, it's 7:02. Okay. Oh, I gotta update my my laptop. I guess I forgot. Oh well. Yeah. So the store is open till 10, so I can go. I hate going when everybody's there. Doing all their Thanksgiving shopping. I just have to get a few things, and I also have to cook tonight because I took chicken out of the freezer. So I'm gonna make little chicken and pasta, penne pasta that I make with onions and peppers and a little salad because everything's gonna go bad. I was gonna make salmon, but I forgot to get Brussels sprouts. That's a good thing. I like to make roasted Brussels sprouts this time of year. It's Thanksgiving week. Can have a little food talk before we get into it. I'm not cooking. The only thing I am making is a pumpkin pie because I always make that. This is just so weird looking. But I hate it when people go like this. So I'm just gonna bring it like this, and hopefully it stays. Hopefully you can hear me. It's gonna flop around. It's a little, just a little weird looking. Still working with it. There we go. Maybe that'll work. Okay, bear with me. Might be a wild ride today. Mars is in Sag. My natal Mars is in Sag, and Mercury and Venus. That's my natal. I have a stellium, which is like 3 or more planets, especially personal planets, in Sag. So, Sagittarius. Now the sun has moved into Sagittarius today, so I'm just going to talk about this for a little bit. And it's Thanksgiving week. Thanksgiving here in the U.S. is Thursday. And it's all about, it's not about football and eating, gorging yourself, although people do that. But this is the, Christ the King week in the readings, the scriptures during the liturgical year, and it's the last week before Advent starts, which is, if you're not, if you weren't raised Catholic like I was, it's Advent is that period before Christmas, leading up to Christmas, right? So it's kind of like this is the end of the liturgical year before Advent starts, So it's kind of dark, but you need the darkness to see the light that's coming, right? So Advent is a hopeful season where and a lot of the world religions have at this dark time of year before the winter solstice, it's as dark as it gets. It's getting dark, like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and all the leaves are down. I love it. This is my favorite time of year because I have all this Sag in my chart. Okay, so, but it's all perfectly orchestrated because it goes along with the cycles of nature. This is the mood, if you will, and that's why we light candles and we drape lights around trees, and we traditionally we have this harvest season. It's a time when we in the U.S. remember the first Thanksgiving when the Pilgrims, they had a rough year, and they had a big party to celebrate with their new friends. So it's everybody came together and everybody brought something, and and then the guys went off and tossed the football around. I don't know what they did, but the women did all the work, and the men went out and shot things and brought home, went fishing and stuff. The women did everything else. Things haven't changed much, have they? cooking. I did that so many years. And when I was growing up, we used to go, well, we'd go to my grandparents. I don't remember what we used to do when I was really little. I guess my mom, I guess we would get together at my grandmother's house. But, for the end of the 80s through a lot of the 90s, we would go to my Uncle Mo's house, which is around the corner, down the street from ours, with my mother's family, He had a big rec room, and, his wife, Bunny, she put out all these tables, and he had a bar down there, a little bar set up, and a fireplace. And he was the one best set up to, have the family. I didn't think I was going to talk about this. But, so for years, they'd set tables with white tablecloths, and she'd cook the turkey, and then my mom and her sister would come and point out all the things that Bunny did wrong. And then they'd come with all the dishes, and, oh, if it weren't for us, we wouldn't be eating it, whatever, And there's always that family stuff, isn't there? And as a kid, I just didn't think that belonged, but it always happens, right? It always happens. No matter, everybody thinks that they're, it is Christ the King. It's sort of that attitude, and I'm all over the place, but Jupiter is the ruler of Sag, right? So Jupiter is the perfect planet to rule over Thanksgiving, because it's the king of the planets. For the Romans, it was the Roman king of the gods, Jupiter. And it's about, the optimism, benevolence, generosity, certainly, expansiveness, parties, Sagittarius. What's the symbol? The archers, but, they were the centaurs who, they used to have these big drunken orgies and parties, Jupiter's all about too much, it can be too much, even good things it can be too much of, right? So that's kind of what you have to watch out with Jupiter. And now Jupiter's in Cancer, my natal Jupiter's in Cancer. So that's kind of a nice placement for Cancer, for Jupiter, because it kind of talks about protection of, your loved ones. Like the king who's looking out for the family. Cancer is about family, ancestors, right? And so, and the crab, Cancer, has a protective shell, right? So that's how the image you get is, very, someone who's, looking out for you, is that Jupiter in Cancer. So, so we got Jupiter retrograde in Cancer. We have also Mercury going direct end of this week, so that's good. Venus and Scorpio, that's like, you want to be attached to somebody, you want to go be intense when Venus is about beauty, it's about art, and, all those kinds of things. So, it makes you want to, the Scorpio is very intense, going down to the depths of things. So like dark movies and dark shows and, real gritty stuff. The themes, dark themes, it's not a light time with Venus and Scorpio. Then Mars and Sag is kind of, fiery, but more of like a, starting things and going off here, going off there, and not really finishing anything. I can be that way myself. I have Mars out of bounds in Sag. I still haven't finished that Disney scrapbook I started. Anyway, I'm pretty good though. I'm aware of it anyway. Okay, so Saturn retrograde Pisces, Neptune retrograde in Pisces, Uranus retrograde in Taurus. Okay, so we have 5 planets still retrograde, and Pluto in Aquarius. But I want to focus on Jupiter today, with the Sag. I don't even know where the moon is. moon is between new and first quarters. I'm gonna make a pumpkin pie this week. I got all the stuff. I just didn't get the whipped cream yet. I'm saving that for the last. If I take it over my dad's house, he makes a big deal out of making the fresh whipped cream, not that stuff in the can. But I like the whoosh, that stuff, you make it in the bowl. It's not the same, Dad. You gotta have the. That's what my kid does, my youngest son. Go in the fridge after Thanksgiving. He takes the thing and he pushes his finger down. I called it whoosh when I was a baby, a little kid. I say, Mommy, I want some whoosh. Because that's the not a sound it makes. Whoosh. Anyway, what was I talking about? Okay. So let's see. Excess. That is not In Excess is not the band of the week. We shall see. I think it's a pretty good song. So I was happy to stumble across it because I had forgotten about it. Let's see. Okay, so I guess we'll dive in now. Second book of Samuel. Samuel, so originally it seems the book of Samuel was one big, long book. It was in the book, History of the Israelites is what it is. From the first book, they divided it into two, around 200 BC, when they made the Greek version, the Septuagint. So the first book, then they divided it into two, and that's the way it stayed in the modern Bible. So the first book ended with Saul's death, and the second was the beginning of King David's reign. So so we have the second book here, talking about the tribes of Israel coming to David and Hebron. He said that they're bone and flesh family. So that goes with Jupiter and Cancer, right? We're gonna over the river and through the woods to grandmother's house. Okay, so everybody came. All the family descended on David and said, yeah, you remember when you brought us, God told you were going to lead us out, and then when Saul was king and you led us out and brought us back, and God said that you should be commander, and well, yeah, we're making you commander now. So he said, okay, so David accepted it because it was God's will, not because because it was his destiny, not because of any egotistical kind of thing, it was a service that he was performing, right? Because it was his destiny, not for any, self-serving kind of reason. Because he was, a benevolent, going to be a benevolent king, someone who would protect them, who had protected them in the past and would protect them in the future, right? Not someone who was going to be, anyway. So, we won't go there. But you know what I'm talking about. If you're American, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, so, so I learned Psalm 122. It says, let us go rejoicing to the house of the Lord. That's where I thought, over the scene in Charlie Brown Thanksgiving, where all the kids are in the station wagon, and they're going, Peppermint Patty had invited herself with Marcy to come along, so that's kind of funny. Chuck is kind of like, Charlie Brown is kind of like the king of Peanuts, He feels obligated when Peppermint Patty invites herself over, and everybody's looking to him to make it nice, to do Thanksgiving, right? And he's like, why are they asking me? I didn't invite everybody over for Thanksgiving. He's like, we don't have anything to give people. What are we going to give people? But they make do. They get out Snoopy helps and Woodstock helps, and they make all this snacks, and they, this is what I watched as a kid growing up, kids. Charlie Brown Thanksgiving, before it was on all these streaming services and you could just watch it on the damn TV. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about that. No, it's not. Okay, Zazoo. Enough. Settle down, Sally. No, I'm not going to settle down. Sagittarius is not one to settle down. Anyway, so then they go finally at the end, they go to his grandmother's house. He said, yeah, but Grandma doesn't live in a house. She lives in a condominium. That doesn't say it all. Anyway, that's Gen X, folks. Anyway, humor. That's another Sag thing, humor. Yeah, Mark Twain was a Sagittarius, and it's that, sometimes it's satire. No, Sag is very, and it can be self-effacing too, kind of, putting yourself down, but it's funny, kind of, like tongue-in-cheek sort of Sag. It's not dark like Scorpio humor. It's more like the jester at the party, like, oh, isn't this funny? But it can be judgmental, that satire. You're getting a lesson. It's funny, but in the context of the humor, there's an underlying poke at something, which if you're paying attention, you'll get, right? It's not Sag. It's not like lighthearted, just jokes, haha. There's a purpose behind it, and it's usually very self-righteous humor, So anyway, judgmental at its core. I'm better than you, and I'm gonna tell this joke, and then you're gonna realize how much better I am than you. The sage. I got a little bit of that myself, I have to admit, from time to time, but I'm aware of it. Okay. So, according to, let's see the Psalm, according to the decree for Israel, to give thanks to the name of the Lord, in it are set up judgment seats. Jupiter was a judge, actually, for the house of David. No, not for the house. That was part of the Psalm, but Jupiter was a judge. That's why the shadow side of Sag can be judgmental, self-righteous, up on your soapbox. You gotta watch that. But, I'll take it. That's not so bad. Anyway, because sometimes, there's wisdom there. And, you just have to point it out to people. But sometimes you can do it in a more subtle way where people will just look up at you and they'll realize that you're practicing what you preach. You just kind of have to stay above the fray. You gotta walk your talk. Anyway, Paul the Colossians 2. Paul's asking people, so the theme is gratitude. He's telling people to be thankful to God that we have Jesus. In other words, that he came for us and that we're heirs to his kingdom along with him, his brothers and sisters, that we can aspire to, a higher calling, if we take up our cross and we, decide to follow him, that Jesus was the firstborn of creation. He was created in the image of God, and as are we. We have spirit, and your spirit in body, right? But Christ was he had the domain over the earth plane. This was his project, if you will, right? To show, through his own life and his own example, how we can, reach our potential, right? How we can arrive at peace, at a wholeness, right? work off our karma, and shed our ego, our egotistical self, and rise higher. And so, he's making us aware of that. And so, just like the Israelites made David aware of his promise, okay, this is his calling. So we have a calling, each one of us. And then, so along those lines, Luke 23, Jesus he's on the cross, and the rulers and the soldiers were sneering at him and saying, he saved others, let him save himself. He says, and they put I-N-R-I. Pilate had that written, slapped it up on top of the cross and said, this is the king of the Jews. And the Jewish leaders said, why did you put that? Take that down. He said, what I have written, I have written. So Pilate was the king, right? He was the ruler. So, he took it upon himself to make that judgment, right? And so it was all in the fulfillment of the plan, of God's plan, right? Of the destiny. And this is a scene that I've always appreciated in the Passion, when they read the Passion at Good Friday, how there were those two criminals crucified on either side of him. And, the one guy says, are you not the Christ? Save yourself, get us down from here, right? It's like he's a magician, right? You just snap your fingers and get us out of here. And the other one said, have you no fear of God? Do you know who this is? We've been just, condemned rightly because we did our, this is, in other words, they're being punished for their karma. They did some crimes and they're, being crucified for them. But Jesus did nothing wrong, right? So he's honoring Jesus as a real king, right? Who, he's asking him, remember me when you get to your kingdom. Right? So, he's showing faith, right? And he's in this position, this hopeless position. He's hanging there, but he has enough respect and enough faith to see, what the other criminal didn't see. So, and then Jesus says, amen, I say to you today, you will be with me in paradise, right? So he literally, saw that the man took responsibility for his own sins and his own path, his own, afterlife. He realized that that's what was important. The other guy's like, get us out of here, he had a very limited point of view. So what's required is for us to go higher and see beyond the immediate circumstances in which we find ourselves, that somebody, can just, the king or whoever, anybody can just get us out. Self-serving, right? Just help me, help my selfish needs, serve me, But that's not the way that's not what Jesus had in mind in coming. We have to save ourselves through our own faith. He wasn't gonna, say, oh yeah, boom, wave the magic wand, That he said the man's faith saved him, right? His belief, despite, in a hopeless situation, he could see the light at the end. He could see that his own, sorrow for and repentance for his own, deeds is what saved him, right? Not going to get too moi on this, but okay. So the song, I said, no, it's got to be a song about a king. It was Tom Petty. It's Good to Be King. The video for this is perfect. It's perfect. It's okay, from his 1994 album, Wildflowers. This was the third single, released in '95. it got to number 68 on the Billboard, but it got to number 6 in the mainstream rock chart. So they called it, some guy called it a self-effacing personal song. One of the most self-effacing personal songs to reach the top 10 in the 90s deals with the phenomenon of rock and roll stardom, right? So, and then he, Tom Petty's great. He was great. We had the best music, so this is why I chose the song, and it's great. You just watch the video. It's great. There's all these images in the song, Velvet and Elvis, and he's talking about how good it is, to be in the public eye, to be this rock and roll, the phenomenon of, being a public figure like that, stardom, superstardom as a rock star, but the fact that we can each be our own rock star, our own Zazoo Plazz, if you will, and our own little kingdom, and go there and find faith and to find peace, right? He says in the song, he can dream. Every now and then I can still dream, So we can go so I actually wore my Queen t-shirt today. So king and queen, if you're a woman, you're queen, or guy, you're a king, whatever you want to be. You'd be a king or a queen, I don't care. So in other words, being in our own little world and not subject to somebody else's control is where we find that feeling of having our own kingdom, right? So, yeah. Gonna get my own kingdom away from this stomping lady. Anyway, it talks about there are earthly kings, right? Rulers who kind of call the shots, eat whatever they want, tear things down, tell people what to do, those kind of people. Who are, self-serving, have self-serving desires, right? And unchecked, this kind of power can be very dangerous, right? Versus Jesus was a different kind of king. He was the exact opposite. So he came to do God's will, right? And it was a tough job. But ultimately he did it for us, right? It's self-serving others, not an ego-based. He was without that, right? He was completely, conscious, whole, right? So he was doing what a king should do. He set an example, and he was protecting us, which is, the benevolent king, and yet, it's not that we are one with him, right? We're all the same. We're all connected with, in his kingdom. So it's not like, it's not this kind of, you must, the way I see it is, we're all connected to the Christ energy, right? And that's where, when we fill our hearts with that, that's where we become empowered, right? It's not like this, I'm not worthy thing. No, it's shining a light on what each one of us can be, right? So it's kind of, but we have to be willing to take up our own crosses, right? Nobody's going to do it for you, right? You got these people, they vote to elect somebody. Not saying anybody in particular, but whatever ruler, and they expect that person to make their lives better. Like, so-and-so is in charge now. Everything's going to be fine. And then they wonder why, their life still sucks. Well, that nobody's going to do that for you. No matter who's you waste an awful lot of time watching politics, watching stuff. People have, they're all human. They have problems. they resign, they say, oh, I don't want to do this anymore, They change, right? Our rulers are human like we are, and it's human nature to have difficulties, to overcome difficulties, to change, to grow, to blah, blah, blah. Nobody else is going to come and clean up your life. That's on you. So anyway, okay, Zazoo, what do you really think? So, but what Tom Petty's talking about, he said that he can dream. He's talking about being, being a king. It's a state of mind, right? And being in that on that higher plane. It's not a physical. It has physical. There might be physical effects of raising your energy, right? But it's more of a state of going to raising your energy, going to a higher state of mind, and then everything, comes up to meet that, right? But you have to make that conscious effort, because nobody can do that for me. So, nobody's gonna, make my pumpkin pie. I gotta do that. I'll go share it with my dad. Maybe he calls me up. What are you doing for Thanksgiving? Like, no, I'm not gonna eat another Cracker Barrel. Warmed up in my dad's microwave. He takes that so seriously. Oh my God. He's got to put everything in, just cover it, just sew, and he's got his, let him have his Cracker Barrel with his fiddle music. I'll go over later. I'll make something here for myself. And then go over and see Dad later. I don't know. But whatever you're doing, I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and I'm thankful for you showing up, and don't forget, before you eat, give thanks for all the good things in your life, because that's how you get more of that, So, and I'll be here next week, same place, different time. Take care.